Hello, and welcome back to Baby Alice's stories. We'll now return to the inner darkness by Jørn Lier Horst, translated by Anne Bruce. Chapter 50. There was nothing on the morning news to suggest that the police had made any progress in their pursuit of Tom Kerr. The coverage was characterized by criticism of the police. Lena's father's name was not singled out, but he was the one who had been the face of the police to the outside world on the day Tom Kerr had run away. And this was the picture they continued to use. Drinking the rest of her orange juice, Lena put down her phone and glanced up at her father's house. He had not come home before she went to bed the previous night, and his car had been gone when she got up. She cleared the table, helped Emily to dress, and packed her things for nursery. Usually they dawdled in the mornings, taking plenty of time, and were seldom in a rush for anything. Lately, it had been different. She hurried to get Emily out of the house and on her way so that she could apply total concentration to the documentary project. Although it gave her a guilty conscience, she consoled herself with the thought that it was only temporary, and anyway, her daughter was happy at nursery. Regarded in isolation, the life of a psychopath must be a simple one. She mused in the car about dropping off Emily. No bad conscience, no regret, no feelings of guilt. It was the same in the evenings. She sped through the housework while Emily was still awake. Once her daughter had gone to bed, she could devote all her attention to the job in hand. It was still raining, and actually she should have gone out to look for new rainwear for Emily, but that could wait until Saturday, when Emily was not at nursery. Then she would be able to choose colours for herself, and she could try things on. Lena descended to her office in the basement. She liked it down there. It was cozy between the old stone walls, and there was little to distract her. Everything around her was job-related in some way or another, making it easier to gather her thoughts and forcing her to be focused and productive. In her notes from the meeting with the psychiatrist, she had accentuated one thing: that evil was like falling in love. No one knew where it came from. Her immediate reaction had been that this was untrue. Love came from the heart, as something natural and genuine, but that was just a figure of speech. The heart really had no other function than to pump blood. She made an effort to read up on other series, to find other voices that could tell her something about the drive towards evil. The head of the Norwegian Psychological Association had been interviewed about in an article published a while back. His thoughts conflicted with what the forensic psychiatrist had said about psychopaths and narcissists. He felt that most of the evil in the world was inflicted by ordinary people who crossed the border from good to evil. It began with small instances and manifested itself in not showing concern. When you did not go to the bother of checking whether the man on the ground was sleeping, of a drunken binge, or was dying. When you let the taxi driver reel off racist jokes without telling him to stop. When you turned a blind eye to your neighbour's wife's bruises, or simply walked past with a down and out, held out a begging hand. It could be tempting to stretch the truth or pass comment on the behaviour of others. To remain silent about what might place you in a bad light. Exaggerate a smidgen. Exaggerate a smidgen. Say something to protect yourself or your nearest and dearest. However, each time you lied or spoke disparagingly about other people was a step in the direction of evil. A gust of wind flung a sheet of rain against the walls above. She had a fleeting urge to go upstairs for a coffee, but was so engrossed that she read on instead. It was a matter of apportioning responsibility. It was easier to take part in something when you did not have to take the punishment on your own. Then your sense of responsibility disintegrated, since you did not have to bear the burden of responsibility alone. Moral objections were eroded. A psychological experiment was shown in which a group of students was asked to play the roles of prisoners and prison guards in a jail. The experiment had to be aborted before the end of the first week, when it was found that the guards were so blinded by the power and the punitive regime they humiliated the prisoners to such an extent that several of them broke down completely. It was a cause of us and them. The others were regarded as untrustworthy, dangerous, and bad people who threatened our way of life. The abuse of authority, subjugation and control and domination of the will of others provided evil with fertile soil in which to flourish, and at the same time both blind obedience and uncritical loyalty to absolute rules were what could transform peaceful democracies into fascist dictatorships. A great deal of what was asserted by the psychologist contained elements she recognized. But it remained difficult to understand how anyone could find satisfaction through mutilating and violating other human beings. Through mutilating and violating another human being. But evil undoubtedly existed. It was just as real as love. A sudden noise caused her to lift her head to the ceiling. The wind must have picked up. What she heard was the bedroom window banging. She got to her feet and brought her empty cup upstairs. Padding through to the kitchen, she fired up the coffee machine before moving to close the bedroom window. The rain had blown in and the floor was wet. She had to fetch a cloth. The documentary project was starting to shift in a different direction. She thought as she wiped the floor, taking on a new dimension. It was now not simply an account of the transgressions of Tom Kerr and his accomplice, but also an exploration of what they stood for. For that, she also needed to find someone who could view their criminality from their point of view. Ideally, this would mean persuading Tom Kerr to appear. Alternatively, she could ask his lawyer to take part. Klaus Tank seemed to enjoy being in the media spotlight. The coffee was ready, and she checked the time. 10:30, and she still had not heard from Maren Doken. The debrief should be finished by now. But if she had to speak to someone about obtaining permission to take part in the documentary, then that could take longer. All of a sudden, she felt unsure of what their agreement had been. Which one of them was meant to phone? She sipped her coffee as she tapped in a text message, stretching the truth a little. I'm in town. Can drop by if you finished at work. There was no answer. For some reason, that worried her. Chapter 51. The search had been scaled down around 11 p.m. and ended at midnight, and there had been no developments overnight. No one was reported missing. Wisting had to admit that the police lawyer had been right, and he felt some of his guilt ease off. It had started raining when the incident took place. The witness had not heard anyone scream. More than likely, someone she knew had picked the girl up and offered her a lift home out of the rain. The shoe may have been dropped there earlier, fallen out of a sports bag on a bike, or been set down in a car roof and forgotten when the owner drove off. He was unaccustomed to thinking up excuses instead of building a worst-case scenario and acting from that hypothesis. At the same, he was aware of the incident nagging at him. An annoying niggle he could have been spared if only they had made a public announcement and asked the girl and the van driver to contact the police. Hammer appeared at his office door. "They're about to start," he said. Wisting left his desk and they walked together up to the spacious conference room on the second floor, where they sat down at the very back beside the wall. Everyone involved in any way on the day Tom Kerr had escaped was assembled for a communal debrief. In addition to the police personnel, there were also a couple of paramedics in attendance. It dawned on him that Lier should have been included. He should have thought of that. More to the point, Stiller should have thought of that. He was the one who had engaged her services, and to make matters worse, she had no colleagues with whom to share the brutal experience. Frank Kvatsmu, from the patrol section, welcomed them all and led the proceedings. No direct evaluation was given, but the session was intended to reduce the level of mental stress, remove the revulsion, and, not least, limit the after effects of what had happened. Everyone who wanted to share feelings or say something was given the floor. It was the vacuum that Wisting recalled best. What had occurred immediately after the explosion? The silence as all the oxygen was violently displaced before the confusion broke out and everything was set in motion. It had lasted for only a fraction of a second, but in his memory the time was long drawn out. He saw everything in his mind's eye in isolated, spasmodic sequences, and in the midst of it all, he glimpsed Lier. Wisting was given the opportunity to speak at the very end. He stood up, strode forward to the podium, and surveyed his assembled colleagues. Some of the officers who had been in the procession were seated at the front. He could not see Marandokan among them, but nodded in recognition to someone who sat with a bandage wrapped around his hand before he began. He said nothing about his own experience, but instead gave an account of the ongoing investigation. He held back the exchange of letters with Theo Derman and the role Klaus Tonk had played, but spoke in detail about the murder of Chris Post-Bach and the search for the man with the grenades. His phone rang while he was speaking, and as he took it out he saw that the call was from Lier, so he turned it to silent mode before he continued. When he had finished, Kvatsmu led a round of questions before the official part of the debrief was concluded. Hot drinks and trays of open sandwiches were brought in, and they were all encouraged to help themselves and stay for further informal discussion. Wisting checked his phone. Lier had tried to phone him again. He moved into the corridor to return her call. "Hi," she said. "Do you know if the debrief is finished yet?" Wisting was taken aback by her question. "It just ended," he replied. "Why do you ask? Have you spoken to Stiller? Did he invite you to take part?" "No, nothing like that. I wanted to meet up with Maren afterwards. She said it would take about an hour." Wisting checked his watch. It had taken almost 2. "It dragged on a bit," he said, "but Maren wasn't here." "She said she would be." "When did you speak to her?" "Yesterday," Lena answered. "She's not answering my messages, and I've tried to call her. Her phone's not switched on." Nils Hammer and Frank Kovatsmo emerged into the corridor. Wisting asked Lena to wait and lowered his phone. "Have you heard from Maren Dokken today?" he asked. Kovatsmo shook his head. He was Maren's line manager and the one most likely to know something. "She's on sick leave, but she did say she would come. I spoke to her yesterday." Kovatsmo walked off, but Hammer stayed beside Wisting, who returned to his conversation with Lena. "She may be sleeping," she suggested. "She's taking pretty strong painkillers." "Maybe," Wisting replied. He was trained to believe that the worst had happened. Complications could have arisen in connection with the injuries she had sustained. Internal bleedings that had not been diagnosed at the hospital or had not occurred until now. Or something even more serious could have happened. "I'm on my way into town now," Lena went on. "I thought I'd call in at her apartment." "Then we'll see you there," Wisting said, ending the conversation. "What's going on?" Hammer asked. Wisting apprised him of the situation. "I'll get the car," Hammer said firmly, heading for the basement stairs. "I'll pick you up outside." Wisting paid a visit to his office to look up Maren Dokken's home address and found the name of the owner, a large property company with its own caretaker service. He made a note of the phone number and shrugged on his jacket. In the corridor, he bumped into Frank Kovatsmo again. "You were asking about Maren Dokken," he said. "Yes." "Her parents tried to phone me during the debrief. They're back from Singapore and are on their way here now. They've been trying to ring her but haven't been able to get hold of her at all." "We haven't either," Wisting said, heading for the stairs. "We're going there now," he shouted back over his shoulder. A camera team from TV2 stood outside the police station. There had been several journalists with video cameras hanging around the building in the past few days. Early this morning, there had been no press presence, but now TV2 were back. Since their exclusive broadcast of Lena's pictures, they were leading the media coverage and were keen to follow it up. If it had still been raining, they would have sheltered in the vehicles and Wisting would have had no trouble reaching Hammer. Now they were ready to pounce. "Any news?" the reporter asked, even before the cameraman was ready. Wisting just wanted to scurry past. It was no longer his job to answer press questions. That function had been passed to the police lawyer on duty in the prosecution section in Tonsberg. All the same, something made him stop. He waited until he was sure that the camera was ready, and stated first that the police had no specific information to impart regarding Tom Kerr's whereabouts or who had helped him to escape. Then he gave an account of the large volume of tip-offs that had streamed in. "Therefore, I'd like to ask for the public's help in finding the owner of a white van that recently picked up a young woman." He gave the time and place, emphasizing that the circumstances were unclear, and repeated that the police were keen to make contact with both the van driver and the pedestrian. The reporter asked a few follow-up questions about the new investigation into the murder of Taran Norum and the search for the other one. Wisting gave a brief answer, pointing out that he was unable to comment on these matters as the Kripos Cold Cases Group and Oslo Police District, respectively, were investigating these cases. He assured them that extensive coordination was in place, but stressed that his paramount task was to find Tom Kerr. He drew the conversation to an end with a nod of the head and rushed across to the car, for Nils Hammer was waiting. "What did you say to them?" he asked. Wisting brushed off the question with a wave of his hand. "You'll have to watch the news," he told him. He would be criticized for the off-the-cuff interview. He had defied his superiors in the police hierarchy and followed his gut instincts as a police officer, doing what he thought was right, what they should have done the previous day. He sat, staring out of the side window, as Hammer swung out onto the Storgata. Wisting caught a glimpse of his own reflection in the wing mirror and realized that something more lay behind his impulsive action. It was 3 days since Tom Kerr had run off. Criticism of the police was rising to a crescendo. Now he had given the media something else to chew on. The traffic lights ahead changed to red. Hammer swore and switched on the blue flashing lights and sirens until he was on the other side. "Take a right here," Wisting said, pointing. They spotted Lena's car in the distance, and Hammer drove up beside it. Wisting had the car door open even before the vehicle drew to a halt. Lena emerged from the apartment block. "I've been up and rung the doorbell," she said. "She's not answering." Wisting phoned the caretaker service as he followed Lena inside, explaining the situation as they climbed the stairs. "He'll be here in about 10 minutes, he said, hanging up. Hammer used his fists on the door, thumping 3 times, so hard that the adjacent walls shook. One of the residents on the floor below came out into the stairwell and stared up at them. Wisting took a couple of steps down towards her. "We're from the police," he said, flipping his police ID open. "Have you seen the woman who lives here?"
Maren?
"Yes."
Not since yesterday.
"When was that?"
In the evening. She was on her way out."
Hammer pounded on the door again. Wisting took another couple of steps down the stairs. The neighbor looked about the same age as Maren Dorkin. "Did you speak to her?" he asked. The woman shook her head.
She was talking on her mobile.
Lena interrupted.
When was that?
"Sometime after 6 o'clock, the woman answered, after giving it some thought.
About 6:30.
Lena held her phone out to him. The log showed a call at 18:23.
That was when I was speaking to her, she said. She was going out for some fresh air.
Wisting swallowed, unable to prevent himself from forming a theory of the very worst case scenario. Nodding, he turned to the woman again. "What was she wearing?"
"Wearing?"
the woman repeated.
"I'm not sure."
"Shoes," Wisting clarified. "Do you remember what kind of shoes she was wearing?" The woman shook her head. "What kind of shoes did she usually wear?" he repeated, his voice raised now. "It's important!"
"I really don't know," the woman repeated.
"Fuck this," Hammer said. Taking a step back, he raised one foot and delivered a mighty kick to the door. The frame gave at the first attempt. The door swung open and slammed against the wall inside. "Maren!" Hammer shouted as he strode in. Wisting remained on the landing with Lena.
"What was that about her shoes?"
she asked. "Afterwards," Wisting replied. The apartment was not large. Hammer took no more than a minute to go through all of it. "Not here," he reported on his return. Wisting crossed the threshold and lifted a sandal lying just inside the door. Size 38. He put it down again. The neighbor from the floor below had arrived at the door and was peering inquisitively into the apartment.
"You were asking about her shoes?" she said, holding out her phone. "I've got this, if it's of any help."
It was a photo taken outside the apartment building, apparently during the summer, as the weather was fine and the leaves on the trees were green and fresh. Maren Dorkin sat sideways on a bench with her legs pulled up to her chest, smiling at the camera. She was wearing a pair of grey hiking shoes with a pink pattern. Wisting recognized them at once. He had seen one of them before. Chapter 52.
What's the significance of the shoes? Lier asked.
Her father looked at her, then across to the woman from the floor below and back again. His eyes were serious and worried. A shoe was found in the ditch at the side of the old Stavern Road yesterday, he said. A shoe identical to that. It was reported that a woman had been dragged into a van there.
Lier took a step back. It took a while for her to digest what he had said, and a feeling of horror surged inside her, making her feel dizzy. She had to take a few deep breaths to collect her thoughts. "Tom Kerr?" she asked.
"Most likely," her father agreed.
Descriptions of what the other victims had suffered whirled through Lina's head. She gulped, squeezed her eyes tightly shut a couple of times and struggled to focus on something else. The camera. It came to her. She had her camera down in her car. She could get it and document what was happening. All the same, she stood rooted to the spot, almost shocked by the cynical idea. A phone rang. Her father's. He took the call and gave a short professional answer without taking his eyes off her. The expression in them had changed, and they were now resolute, determined. Lier turned on her heel and took the stairs with increasing speed, throwing open the door. She rushed into her car and took out her camera. It was not a matter of being cynical, she told herself, but of having something to hide behind, a role and function that allowed her to distance herself from the case in hand. An electronic beep indicated that the camera was ready. She aimed the lens at the apartment building, filming the entrance before locating the windows of Marin's apartment on the 3rd floor. She could make out a shadow up there, but could not tell whether it was her father or Hammer. Her mobile rang. The sound could be edited out, she thought, as she held the camera steady for another couple of seconds before she fished out her phone. It was Adrian Stiller. She lowered the camera and answered. "It's okay with us," he said. "I can have a chat with your father, but I'm sure it'll work out." Lier had no idea of what he meant. "For a camera to follow the investigation," Stella explained. "I've cleared it with the top brass here at Kripos, and I'll just have to have a word with your father." Lier glanced up at the window on the 3rd floor. "Haven't you spoken to him?" she asked. "Not yet." "About Marin Dawkin, I mean. What about her?" "Tom Kerr has abducted her," Lier said. "Dragged her into a van." She had to explain the little she knew one more time. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday evening. I spoke to her just before 6:30. She was going out for a walk." Stiller cursed. "The log," he said, muttering something. "What do you mean?" Lier said. "What log?" "I'll have to call you back," Stiller said, and rang off before Lier had a chance to say anything else. Chapter 53. It was Stem started calling, the police lawyer from the previous evening. She was back on duty. Guro was her name. Not Gru or Goon. Her voice was sharp. "What on earth is this?" she demanded. "TV2 say that you've issued a statement." Wisting interrupted her. "It's Marin," he said, nudging the sandal on the floor with the toe of his shoe. "Marin Dawkin. He's taken her." "Who is Marin?" Wisting had to explain. Anxiety churned unpleasantly inside him as he spoke. "That's the explanation," he said. "That's why Tom Kerr came back here to strike again. He's taken one of us." Silence reigned at the other end of the phone. Wisting calculated the time that had passed. More than 12 hours, almost 14, in fact, had elapsed.
We had no way to anticipate that, the police lawyer replied. We did what we could. Wisting did not enter into discussion about what they could have done. They had to look ahead now. Get a statement out, he said. An all-points bulletin to all media. The police lawyer had nothing more to say. Wisting hung up and phoned Frank Kovatsmo to bring him up to speed. Speaking in short sentences about what they feared had happened. Her parents will be here at any minute, Kovatsmo said. Wisting crossed to the window and peered down at the area in front of the apartment building where Lene was standing with her camera. Can you see to that? He asked. They'll have to be told before we go public with it. I'll call them straight away, he agreed and disconnected the call. Hammer was in the middle of another phone conversation. Wisting understood that he was organizing surveillance of Maren Docken's mobile phone. His own phone rang again. The police chief this time. The police lawyer must have informed her of the situation. How certain are you? She asked. We're certain that Maren Docken is missing, he answered. Everything else is uncertain. What personnel do you need? Resources? Everything available, Wisting replied. We have to make a monumental effort, and we don't have much time. All vehicles that fit the description will have to be traced. We'll have to check all vehicles that have passed through the toll stations and all the speed cameras, all CCTV footage. It's going to demand a colossal input of manpower, and when this is made public, we'll be flooded with tip-offs. I'll make sure that everything else is set aside, the police chief said. No one will work on anything other than this. Wisting heard another incoming call. Tunks, he said. I'll get things moving at this end. Just one thing, the police chief added. You need to keep away from the press. Internal Affairs are investigating a possible charge of misconduct with regard to Tom Kerr's escape. It's under continual review whether you should have anything to do with the case at all. Wisting felt a prick of irritation. He had nothing against avoiding contact with journalists, but the decision was tainted with mistrust. It was an indication that the media were correct in insinuating that what had happened was his responsibility, his fault. Fine, was all he said, however. He rang off and answered the cued call from Stiller. I should have been told about this yesterday, he complained. You've heard about it already? Wisting asked. Stiller confirmed this. I may have something for you, he said. What's that? The surveillance log from Floyd 2. At 23:34 last night, a Polish registered grey Ford Transit Connect arrived at his house. It parked up for a moment before the garage doors were raised. Then it drove in and the doors came down. 5 minutes later, it drove off again. Who was driving the car? Difficult to see. A man. I'm waiting for a response from Poland with regard to the owner. We need to get into that house, Wisting decided. The grounds are a bit flimsy for a search, Stiller objected. We need to go in, Wisting insisted. Chapter 54. Hammer drove. Wisting sat in the passenger seat, studying the pictures that Stiller had sent him. He had imagined that 2 detectives had been sitting in an unmarked car monitoring Floyd 2's house, but the surveillance was electronic. 2 police officers dressed as electricity workers had climbed up the nearest street lights and fitted cameras. From an office in the Kripos building in Oslo, they could sit and control them, zooming in, panning out, and tilting the cameras up or down. All the footage was saved, but each time a movement was registered, it was also automatically captured as a still image. The placement of the cameras meant they had a wide view of the house frontage, but the slanted angle made it impossible to see who was seated in the car. A picture showed the vehicle on its way into the large garage underneath the house. Wisting used 2 fingers to zoom in on the small screen. He saw a pair of legs, as if Floyd too was standing inside waiting. In the next photograph, the driver had stepped out. The slanted angle meant that the camera took a picture only from the waist down. But it was obviously a man. The next 3 images showed the man skirting around the vehicle as if to open the inside door. In the last photo, the doors were on their way down. The picture was snatched away from the screen when the phone rang. This time, the call was from the prosecution office. A different police lawyer this time. A different name. Wisting had pleaded his case as soon as they had set off, requesting permission to search the house. He had been told that the application would be considered. The conditions required for a search warrant have not been fulfilled, he was told. Wisting had been aware of that Floyd too had a connection to Tom Kerr, and that a delivery van had been spotted at his home, was insufficient to charge him with the abduction of Maren Dorkin. But Wisting had hoped that the lawyers might be willing to stretch the rules for once. Now it would be up to him and Hammer. They were approaching the house. Wisting knew the way and gave Hammer directions into the cul-de-sac. As the gate was open, they drove up and parked the car in the same place as on Wisting's previous visit. "What do we do?" Hammer asked. "Go in," Wisting replied. He marched up to the house and rang the doorbell. Bing bong! No reaction from inside. He was about to ring again when his mobile sounded. Dee-dee-doo-doo, dee-dee-doo-doo-doot. It was Adrian Stiller. "There was a movement at the window when you arrived," he said. Wisting turned round and gazed up at the street lights, but was unable to spot any cameras. "Are you sitting watching us?" he asked. "Window 2-2, Stiller added. Wisting wheeled round again and took a step back. This was a military description that meant the upper floor. Second window from the left. The curtains were drawn. "He's only been out of the house to go to the mailbox and to accept food deliveries," Stiller continued. "He's still inside, unless he sneaked out by the back door." Hammer rang the doorbell again. Bing bong! The sound of the chime inside reached as far as the front steps. "Any news of the Polish vehicle?" Wisting asked. "Registered to a Polish woman from Warsaw," Stiller answered. "They're making further inquiries." "Excellent," Wisting replied. "Thanks for the info." He dismissed the call and walked down the steps. A sign from a private security firm warned that the house was equipped with an alarm and that CCTV was installed. He could see no cameras, but had no doubt that they existed. Floyd too was probably sitting at a desk watching on one of his computer screens. "We'll go around the back," he said. A paved path ran round to the rear of the house. The luxuriant garden was well tended, with no weeds in sight, and ramrod straight edges between the lawn and flower beds. 3 broad steps led up to a terrace of slate tiles and a substantial set of cast iron outdoor furniture. Wisting moved forward to the window and found a gap in the curtains. He peered into the room where they had met Floyd too. The room was in darkness, and all the computer screens were black. Hammer whistled and waved to Wisting, pointing down to the basement wall on their left, where 2 rectangular windows were both fitted with metal bars. "It's not long since those were installed," Hammer commented. Wisting descended from the terrace towards the flower bed bordering the house. Hammer was right. Notches had been cut in the old basement wall, and 4 steel bars had been fitted. The plaster around the brackets looked relatively new. maybe a year old. He crouched down beside a bush to look inside. He could only see parts of an unfurnished room illuminated by a harsh, bright light. The walls were beige and completely bare, and the floor was a darker color. Directly across from the window, he could see a grey door without a handle, but with an inspection hatch on it, like in a prison cell. Hammer walked across to the other window. "Bloody hell, there's someone lying down there," he said. A twig snapped as Wisting tramped on a bush. Hammer made room for him so that he could see. Someone in hospital-type pajamas was lying on a padded bench, a strap wrapped around each ankle. Immediately above the knees, another strap was fastened. Wisting put his head close to the metal bars, but it was impossible to see the rest of the body from their position. It was also difficult to make out the sex and age of the body, or even whether the person was alive or dead. Hammer was first to reach the terrace. He grabbed the door handle and shook it ferociously before banging the palm of his hand on the window pane. The glass shook and vibrated, but no one appeared on the inside. Wisting grabbed one of the garden chairs. The iron scraped and left tracks. The iron scraped and left tracks on the slate tiles as he dragged the chair behind him. He lifted it and, after a confirmatory nod from Hammer, smacked the legs against the glass door in one swift and sudden movement. Bang! He waited for an alarm to wail, but all that could be heard was the tinkling sound of shattering glass. Psh! "Police!" Hammer shouted as he charged in. Wisting followed close behind into the next room and on into the hallway he had entered the last time he had been here. A staircase led down to the basement. "Police!" Hammer called out again. They followed the corridor and located the steel door. "Locked," Wisting said. There was a loud bang as he slid the bolt on the inspection hatch. The strong stench of urine was immediately apparent. The figure on the bench raised its head. "It's him!" Wisting exclaimed, shouting his name. "Floyd, too!" His head fell back again. Wisting began to suspect what was going on. "Is everything all right, too?" The answer was faint. "Yes." "Do you know where the key is?" No response. Wisting turned to face Hammer. "2-2," he said, heading at top speed back to the stairs and up to the upper floor. He soon got his bearings and found the room that still had spotted some movement. A woman backed away from the door when it burst open. "We're from the police," Wisting reassured her. "Who are you?" She looked hesitant but did not answer. Wisting checked that she was alone. The room resembled a hotel bedroom with a TV and a small sitting area. He opened the door into an ensuite bathroom, empty. "What's your name?" he asked her again. "Regina," she replied. "Regina Babinski." In her mid-20s, she was thin and had long black hair and wore a dressing gown. Her name could probably be found in a police report somewhere about sex workers. "Polish?" he asked. "Do you speak Norwegian?" The woman nodded twice. "What's going on here?" Hammer demanded. "He wants this," the woman replied. "For 24 hours, I just look in on him. Once every 4 hours. "Do you have a key?" She glanced towards a little table by the door, and they saw the key on it. Hammer grabbed it. "When did you come here?" Wisting asked. "Last night," the woman stammered. "How did you get here?" She looked as if she did not understand. "Who drove you here?" "A friend." They persuaded the Polish woman to tell them how she had been driven there in a van and dropped off in the garage. Have you been here before? Done the same thing?" She nodded. "Does he pay you for this?" Hammer asked. When the woman nodded again, Hammer shook his head in consternation. "Stay here," he said, pointing his finger at her. They descended the stairs again. "What kind of sick setup is this?" Hammer mumbled. Wisting repeated his previous conversation with Chu about how being tied up had to be the optimal freedom. When you were unable to make any choices and had no responsibility, all you could do was lie there, completely at the mercy of others. Hammer grunted as he inserted the key in the lock and turned it round. Floyd too raised his head as they entered. Hammer stepped forward and Wisting stood at the door. "Leave me alone," Chu said. Hammer loosened the strap around one of his hands. "We have to talk," he said, unfastening some of the other straps. "You have no choice." "Nothing illegal is going on here," Chu assured them. "Everything is voluntary, on both sides, her and me." Hammer undid the rest of the straps. "Sit up," he ordered. Floyd too did as he was asked and sat on the bench with his legs dangling. The thin pajamas were soaked in urine that had begun to dry out. "You don't understand," he said, shaking his head. "This is about meditation, finding nothingness, reaching the deeper layers of consciousness." "That's fine," Hammer said. "We're trying to find Tom Kerr. You're the person who has spoken most to him in the recent past. Have you any idea where he is?" He placed his index finger on Chu's forehead. "Somewhere deep down inside there?" Floyd too twisted his head away. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice bitter. "The faster you tell us what we're looking for, the faster you can go back to your own business," Hammer told him. Chu directed his gaze at Wisting. "I've already told you what I know about Kerr," he said. "We didn't have conversations of that nature. If his farm hadn't been burnt down, then he would probably have gone there. He had ideas of rebuilding it, but now I don't know. I think he'll just be enjoying his freedom." "In what way?" "In the great outdoors." "Where?" "On the high mountaintop or deep inside a dark forest, far away from people." Wisting took a step towards him. "Is that something you've talked about?" Floyd too began to massage one of his wrists. "To some degree," he answered. "Many of our conversations in prison are about the inmates wanting to be in a completely different place, out in the open, for example." "Any particular mountain or forest?" "No." "That doesn't help us much," Hammer broke in. "Sorry," Chu said, swallowing loudly. "I've told you before, I can't help you." Hammer put the keys for the homemade isolation cell down on the bench. "You'll have to get hold of a glazier," he said. "Your terrace door is smashed." Chu nodded, without protest. Wisting had already left the room. They had wasted enough time. Chapter 55. A name Wisting had not seen for years popped up on his mobile screen. Holger Midton. He had been the local policeman in Rivertal before the reorganization, when his office had been closed down, but the number was still stored on his phone. He pulled into the right lane and answered the call. As the retired officer introduced himself, the conversation was relayed over the loudspeakers in the car, and Wisting let him know that Hammer was also listening in. "I'll be brief," Midton said. "You've probably got enough on your plate, but I've got some things that might be of interest to you. People up here still get in touch with me if there's something going on." "Tell us about it." "I just received a phone call from a man who'd heard you were on the lookout for a white van. He was able to tell me about a sighting that might well fit time-wise." Wisting's interest grew. The former policeman explained that there was an old, disused welding workshop in the vicinity. About 10:30 the previous night, a van of that description had turned up there. It had been driven into the workshop and the doors closed behind it. The witness lived further down the road, but had been out fishing and was on his way home on foot. The workshop is fairly isolated, but the residents in the area are a bit more than normally observant. Things have happened before in that neck of the woods. Stripping cars for parts, that sort of thing. 2 years ago, smuggled booze was stored in there. Wisting waited for him to continue. The workshop is at the end of a cul-de-sac, Midton explained. Just over an hour later, another car drove down the road. The witness saw it from his living room window this time. He thought it must have come from the workshop. So the van is still inside. I don't know, but I was thinking of going up there to take a look. Wisting and Hammer exchanged glances, and Hammer nodded. We're not far away ourselves, he said. We can meet you there in half an hour. Then I'll wait, Midson replied. He gave directions before disconnecting the call. 20 minutes later, they were parking outside the abandoned workshop, an ugly brick building with a flat roof situated beside a blasted rock face. Weeds grew wild along the walls and in the gravel yard. A 4-wheel drive Subaru was parked at an angle in front of a shed that had been used as a store. The retired policeman stepped out. His paunch was larger and his beard thicker since they had last met. All three shook hands. Any news of the missing girl? Midton asked. She's a colleague of ours, Wisting told him, and went on to explain what had happened. Any leads? Midton asked, clearly shaken. Unfortunately, we've got nothing, Wisting said. Her mobile has been traced, but it was switched off yesterday, about the same time and place as the abduction. Hammer moved towards the deserted workshop. Who owns the building? He asked. An old acquaintance of mine, the retired policeman replied. Peter Hoagland. He ran a car workshop here, but it closed down nearly 5 years ago, just before I stepped down. We caught him with stolen cars. Since then, it's really just been left empty. About 2 years ago, he was arrested again, this time with 80,000 litres of smuggled liquor. He's in prison now. They approached the grey building. The windows and the double doors were blacked out. It's locked, Midton clarified. It's not possible to see in anywhere. Can we get in somehow? Holger Midton nodded. We dealt with the complaint while the former owner was running a welding shop here, he began. A few youngsters had gained access through the canteen window at the back. They had bored holes in the window frame all the way through, at the top of the window, and used a steel wire to lift the handle inside. I went round and had a look. The hole's still there. They followed Midton to the rear of the building. The window was not darkened like the ones that overlooked the workshop, and they could see a table inside with 6 upturned chairs stacked on top. Along one wall there was a kitchen worktop with a filter coffee machine, and a fridge stood in one corner. A hole in the window frame was large enough to insert a ballpoint pen. Some insulation material and a wooden plug lay on the floor. The hole had obviously been replugged, and the retired policeman must have poked it out before they arrived. I brought this with me, he said, taking out a long steel wire with a loop at one end. Hammer grinned. It might be best if I do it, Midton suggested. Then you won't land in trouble. He threaded the steel wire through the hole and down on the inside of the window. After a couple of attempts, he succeeded in drawing the loop over the handle. He pulled the steel wire and released the catch as the window tilted open. Almost there, Midton commented. Using an iron bar that he had probably found lying somewhere close by, he slipped it into the opening and used the bar to lift the security catch. There you go, he said. Hammer climbed in first and passed out a chair for the other two to stand on. Wisting clambered in next, while Holger Midton returned to his car to fetch a flashlight. The electricity is cut off, he explained. The canteen door opened out directly into the workshop. It was virtually empty, with only a few car tires piled up, one on top of the other. The retired policeman was obviously disappointed. Wait a minute, Hammer said, pointing. A paint shop. Further inside, against the back wall, there was an enormous container with ventilation pipes leading up through the roof and double doors closed with a padlock. Hammer found an iron pipe and used it on the lock. Initially, it refused to budge, but after a few more strikes, the shackle broke. Taking hold of one of the double doors, Wisting tugged at it and was immediately aware of the strong chemical smell of paint. When he opened the door wide, Midton aimed a beam of light inside, and there it was, a white delivery van. Wisting found a pair of latex gloves in his pocket. He pulled them on and stepped into the paint shop container. Midton followed him with the flashlight. The cabin windows seemed to be covered on the inside. He tried the driver's door and found it unlocked. Once it was open, it took him a few seconds to fathom what had happened. The entire cab area was coated in a layer of grey paint. A spray paint gun was lying on the seat, and a coupling and several other parts lay on the floor beside the pedals. Wisting had experience of cases in which fire extinguishers had been used to remove evidence in gateway vehicles after a robbery or another serious crime in which the perpetrators were reluctant to draw attention in the way that setting the vehicle alight would do. This was a more advanced approach. The tiny nozzle on the spray gun ensured that the fine spray of paint would achieve total coverage and leave a coating to make it almost impossible to find fingerprints or DNA traces. "There's a compressor and a diesel generator out in the workshop," Midton told him. They skirted around the van, and he cautiously slid the side door open, unsure of what he would find. The cargo space was empty, but it too was completely covered in paint. The garage doors clattered behind them. Hammer had opened them from inside, and now daylight flooded in. "I think this is the van we've been looking for," Wisting said. "We need to call out the technicians." Chapter 56. There was nothing along the road to say how the attack on Marin had occurred. Lena held her camera low, directly above the white line, and filmed as the car drove past. Her body was tense, filled with anxiety. She had no other way to deal with it apart from keeping herself occupied and doing something practical. She sat down again in the driver's seat and placed the camera on the passenger seat beside her. Her phone buzzed. Bleep, bleep. A text message from Sophie, offering to pick up the children from nursery and keep the girls at her house. Lily thanked her with an emoji heart and then turned her car. The address was already stored in a GPS, and it had been on her to-do list for a while now. She wanted to visit the place where Tom Kerr had held his victims captive, his small holding in Ostmarka. It was a relatively long drive into Oslo, through the city and out into the forested area beyond, but she would be home again in good time for Amelie's bedtime. On the road, she caught 2 news broadcasts on the radio. In the first, she heard that the police were keen for the driver of a white delivery van and his female passenger to get in touch. The next one stated that a 27-year-old woman had been reported missing, and linked this to a witness account of a woman being picked up by a van driver the previous evening. She drove past the turn-off twice. It was nothing but a gravel track, with grass growing in the middle and dense vegetation along the verges. After a few hundred meters, the track divided into 2, with the one on the right closed off by a steel wire secured to 2 trees. A sign was attached to the wire. Private. Lina took out her camera, filmed the sign and the track that continued on in between the trees. As the wire was held with a simple carabiner hook, Lina unhitched it and laid it down at the side of the track. Then she drove a couple of meters along the track, hopped out of the car and reattached the wire. The track ahead was no more than 2 real ruts. The grass in the middle was higher here, but in some places it was flat, as if a car had driven down here not so long ago. Before she had left home, she had entertained the idea that Tom Kerr might have come back here, but she had dismissed the notion. there was nothing to come back to. It was more likely that someone had been here on a mission similar to hers, a journalist keen to recount his story, or someone simply being nosy. All the same, she locked her car doors. Click. She drove over the cattle grid that had been removed in the past, hindering the fire brigade from accessing the blaze at the time when the farm had gone up in flames. She stopped and left the car again to do more filming. 200 meters further on, the forest opened out into a clearing. Lena had gained the impression that the entire small holding had burned down, but 2 small buildings were still standing. One was a red-painted annex, directly behind where the farmhouse had been situated. The other an outhouse on the fringes of the forest. The place was completely derelict, and the sky above the trees was dark and gloomy. Heavy, plump clouds tinged a deep grey blue would look suitably atmospheric on film. The door lock sprang open when she touched the handle, and she took out her camera. As she stood surveying the scene, a car had been here recently. A yard between the ruins left by the fire had been covered in gravel, but the entire expanse was being reclaimed by nature. There were puddles of rainwater and tire tracks left by a vehicle. A rough, bare brick chimney was all that remained of the farmhouse. Charred beams and shattered roof tiles lay inside the perimeter of the foundation walls. Nettles and other weeds had sprouted all over it, and a few trees that had taken root in the ruins had now grown to a height of 1 meter or so. An overgrown bush with white flowers was twined around the few remnants of the framework in the far corner. The barn was equally devastated. A rusty, burnt-out tractor stood inside it, with only the metal treads of the steel cables left of the large rubber tires. One part of the barn was equipped with a cellar, and Lena moved up to the edge of it to look down. 2 black birds took off and flew away. A variety of plants had taken root in the ashes, and a broad-leaved bush climbed up the brick wall. An opening in the wall led out to the back, where there had once been a door. Lena skirted around it to the rear of the barn. She had to negotiate her way through a thorny thicket and cover her head with her arms to avoid being scratched. She walked through the cellar and into an adjacent smaller room, where she saw a bathtub in the middle of the floor, with no plumbing attached. It was an old type, the kind sometimes used on farms to hold water for horses or cows. In several places, patches of enamel had flaked off, and it was full of withered leaves. Beside the wall, a steel worktop was blackened with soot, and chains hung from a number of hooks. In the corner, she saw an upturned chair with 4 tubular metal legs, but no seat or back. Lena stepped back, and an involuntary shiver ran through her body when she realized that this could be the room in which Tom Kerr had dismembered and steeped his victims in chlorine before burying them in the woods. For a while she stood paralyzed before she managed to raise her camera and take some film. She shot from several angles before going up again and filming down through the opening in the floor. She decided she needed some overview pictures too, and drove the car away to make sure it was not caught in her film. She parked on the track with the bonnet pointing forward, ready to drive home. Viewing this place had a powerful effect on her. It brought her up close and gave her the intimacy she hoped to convey in her film. She manually adjusted the aperture to obtain greater depth of field. The dark clouds and the dense forest in the background of this deserted place reinforced the bleak impression. On the right-hand side of the barn's imprint, she could see a trail through the tall grass that was now, from a distance, easier to discern. She doubted whether animals had made it.
There was a distinct track leading to the outhouse, as if someone had walked repeatedly to and fro. She lifted her camera and zoomed in on the outhouse. The timber was grey and weather-beaten, and on the side facing her there was a lattice window and a door that looked barred and bolted. A gust of wind soughed through the trees, making the leaves rustle. Lena shivered. She was lightly dressed in only a sweater and jeans, and though she had a jacket in the car, she had not thought to bring it with her. Walking up to the fire-damaged ruins again, she followed the trail of around 30 meters back to the outhouse. One of the small panes of glass was broken. She peered in, but it was difficult to make out anything in the darkness. Resolutely, she pulled back the bolt on the door and heard the hinges protest as she opened it wide. The outhouse was piled high with old beehives and beekeeping equipment, and the floorboards creaked as she moved inside. Dust swirled up, and the air she sniffed was dry and stuffy. She looked around for signs that might tell her why someone had been here, but as she could see nothing, she turned to step outside again. She looked around for signs that might tell her why someone had been here, but as she could see nothing, she turned to step outside again. Right inside the door, a spade was propped up, with crumbs of earth on the floor in front of it. She carried it with her out into the light and realized it could not be long since it had been used, as dark, damp earth still clung to the blade. Lena felt her chest tighten. The path she had followed ran on alongside the outhouse and into the forest, towards the place where the bodies of Thea Polden and Salva Haddad had been unearthed. Chapter 57. This did not bode well. The police chief's secretary had phoned to tell him and Hammer to attend a meeting in her office. Being summoned in this way only ever meant bad news. Wisting had been given a dressing down a couple of times before, including the last time that Terje Nordbo and Internal Affairs had placed him under investigation. On that occasion, he had been informed that he was suspended from duty. They drove from the workshop as soon as the crime scene technicians had arrived to take over. Hammer had discovered that the white van was registered to a building firm in Asker. The plates have been reported stolen, he said, without looking up from his phone. Stolen and attached to a similar vehicle, Wisting commented. Hammer agreed. The same happened when Thea Polden and Salva Haddad were abducted. Wisting turned into the town centre streets of Tonsberg. A few journalists were hovering outside the main entrance of the large police station. Hammer swore under his breath. We haven't got time for this, he said. Wisting was of the same opinion, but didn't say anything. The van and workshop could represent the breakthrough they had been waiting for. There were several balls to start rolling, and in all honesty, they had no time to lose. None of the reserved parking places outside the police station was vacant, and he was forced to park a block away. A couple of photographers took pictures as they entered. Immediately inside the doors, no expense had been spared on furnishing a room where the police could meet the press, including specially installed fiber optic cables for TV transmissions, suitable lighting, and a back wall emblazoned with the police logo. The door stood open, and glasses and carafes of water were laid out. The lift took them to the top floor, and the receptionist stood up when they arrived. Kiel is expecting you, she said.
moving towards the door where she knocked, opened it, and then ushered them inside. They each took a seat. "You found the van, I hear," the police chief said, motioning in the direction of the computer screen.
"Most likely,"
Wisting answered.
"We've just come from there."
Nodding, the police chief changed the subject. "We found it necessary to make some changes in the organization of work," she said. "It's less than helpful, having an investigation led from a number of directions." Wisting agreed, appreciating what she meant. A total of 5 different investigation teams were involved in these intersecting cases, and in addition, Adrian Stiller and the Cold Cases group at Kripos still retained an interest.
"The most pressing aspect is Maren Dawkins, though,"
Hammer pointed out. "I've discussed the case with the other chiefs and public prosecutors in the relevant districts," she continued. "We've agreed that the work needs to be coordinated in a different, more effective fashion. Therefore, we've decided to create a separate investigation group cutting across the various districts." She fixed her eyes on Wisting. "It would be customary to appoint you to lead and coordinate the work, but unfortunately, you're currently under investigation by Internal Affairs."
"That's just a formality, surely,"
Hammer broke in. "Unfortunately, another issue has cropped up too," the police chief added. "A lawyer called Handen has been in touch in connection with a complaint by Floyd II. It concerns unwarranted access to his house in addition to misconduct."
"The measures taken were completely warranted,"
Hammer protested, launching into an explanation. The police chief cut him off. "He has sent us footage from his CCTV system," she said. "It's entirely possible that you acted in good faith, but breaking a window to gain access seems somewhat precipitate. Anyways, the complaint has been sent to Internal Affairs and it will be up to them to judge whether your actions were reprehensible." Hammer groaned. Wisting sat forward, perching on the edge of his chair.
"Who will lead the investigation?"
he asked. "Idar Semmelman," the police chief replied.
"Semmelman?"
Hammer repeated.
"He's been searching for the accomplice for 5 years now, to no avail. All he's achieved are forms and databases."
"He's the one who knows the case best," the police chief said firmly. "He's been involved from the very start."
"Has he been informed?"
Wisting asked. The police chief nodded. "I said I would let you know." Shuffling some papers on her desk, she glanced at the clock. "The prosecutor responsible on our side will be Guro Stemstad," she went on. "I'll announce the reorganization at the press conference in 30 minutes, at the same time as we announce that the missing woman is Police Constable Maren Dawkins."
"What will we do now?" Hammer asked. "Where do we fit into this reorganization?"
"You are both relieved of your duties," the police chief said.
"What do you mean? That we've been taken off the case?"
Agnes Kiel placed one hand on top of the other. "A problem of impartiality has come up," she answered. "In addition to you both being under investigation by Internal Affairs, you're both emotionally involved. The actions you took at Floyd II's residence clearly demonstrate that. It's especially important that the rules of criminal procedure are followed to the letter when it applies to one of our own." Hammer stood up.
"You mean that we have to sit on our hands while one of our colleagues has been abducted?"
"You're relieved of duty on this case," she repeated. "You've worked a great deal of overtime in the last few days. I suggest you take some time off with effect from today." Wisting also rose from his seat. Inside, a tumult of thoughts and emotions was raging, and he had to get a strong grip on himself to avoid betraying his feelings.
"Was that all?"
he asked. The police chief gave him a brief nod. Chapter 58. Several journalists had arrived outside the police station and stood huddled in small groups, chatting, anticipating being let in at any moment. A man with a TV2 logo on his jacket elevated his camera and pointed it at them. One of the reporters standing nearest the door addressed himself to Wisting, asking if there had been any developments. "There's a press conference at 4 p.m, Wisting replied, transferring all his attention to his mobile phone. He had missed 2 calls while they were meeting the police chief. Both were from Line. He returned her call as soon as they were out of earshot. "I'm at Leer Katvet," Line told him. "Tom Kerr's small holding in Ostmarke." Wisting immediately felt a sense of disquiet. "What on earth are you doing there?" "Filming," she replied. "Mainly doing a recce and some research for my documentary." Recce. Reconnaissance. R-E-C-C-E. Recce. "Mainly doing a recce and some research for my documentary." They had reached the car by now. "Someone else has been here recently," Line went on. Wisting clambered into the driver's seat. "Oh?" he said. "It's a bit suspicious," Line added. "Someone's been digging out here." "Digging?" "The spade was in the shed," Line explained. "There's mud on it. I followed the track into the trees at the back and found a spot some distance into the woods. It's covered over with twigs and brush, but it looks like someone's buried something there." "Are you sure?" "I can send you a photo." "Do that," Wisting replied as he started the car. "I phoned Stiller when you didn't answer," Line added. The conversation had now switched to hands-free. "He's on his way here." His thoughts were racing. He had been removed from the case, but this was an offshoot of the investigation and also concerned his daughter. No one could deny him the chance to help her. "Hammer and I are on the way too," he said as he shifted into gear.